AskReddit by Sadius Notsad. What criminal committed an almost perfect crime and what was the thing that messed it up? That one dude who robbed a bank by hiring a bunch of people from Craigslist to show up wearing the same outfit he was and wait outside, he would have gotten away, but a homeless man saw him do a practice run the day before and after the robbery told the police. DB Tuber was the name the press gave him as he escaped on an inner tube down a creek. Anthony Curcio is his name and he wrote a book that was very interesting. He planned his robbery for months. He planned to use pepper spray to subdue one of the guards, and to convince himself it would work he pepper sprayed himself. He also moved boulders out of the creek for months before to make sure his escape path was clear. Edit. It is spelled Anthony Curcio, as was pointing out to me. Also, he robbed an armored car, not a bank. His book is called Heist and High. The Antwerp Diamond Heist, the perfect heist of the century where an Italian gang stole 100 million in gems. While leaving Antwerp, they disposed of the disguises and the tools used, but one member of the gang was too lazy to burn everything as instructed. Among the rubbish, the police found envelopes of the Antwerp Diamond Center and a receipt for a sandwich bought at a store close to the center. They recovered video footage of the sandwich store and busted the mastermind of the heist, who didn't give up his mates, but some were later identified. Some of the stolen diamonds are still unaccounted for. UG. Group projects. Wolfgang Beltracchi. He made millions with forged paintings he painted all himself. He was ultimately caught because he once accidentally used paint that contained a very slight amount of a substance that wasn't used in the days of the original painter. If you're going to deceive people using forged artwork, at least go the route of Hans van Meecheren selling trading them to screw with Hermann Göring. But he was found a similar way. A substance that was a major component of his paint mixtures was a 20th century invention. Robert Durst. He was caught while being interviewed for an HBO series, to which he initially agreed on to clear his name. Went to bathroom and mumbled to microphone, which he thought was off. What the hell did I do? Kill all of them, of course. This was later presented to the court as evidence. You can still watch it on HBO. Honestly, one of the most shocking moments in a documentary. It's crazy. That Australian kid who hacked the FBI and put his photos on their website. He scrubbed the metadata from the photos so it wouldn't show the GPS location. Then he accidentally uploaded the original with that information still on it. That crime kinda sounds like it should barely be a crime, or at least turn into a job offer. Assuming he only hacked the site to prove he could, and wasn't trying to get in the way of FBI investigations, I'm guessing a kid who could hack their site shows great promise. Though being Australian, he couldn't actually work for them. I worked in the federal prison system. Met a man in his mid-30s who was serving time for a series of bank robberies. His arrest was a complete surprise in his area. Model citizen. Married, young kids. Volunteered and gave generously to his kids' school. His bank robberies were intricately planned and well-timed. One of his underlings decided to open up his own bank robbing business. He wasn't as smart and ratted out our man when he was caught, as part of his plea deal. Reminds me of my relative and his moonshine business. Proceeds went to both his household and the community, including the trunk of local sheriff deputies. Lol, I've heard of others selling drugs or moonshine while donating to the community. I knew a guy who got into selling drugs on the dark web. He had this setup where he'd buy the drugs and package them in his room, ship them through USPS, and collect money through cryptocurrency. He made a lot of money, went on for a while without being caught. They even found fictionalized accounts he wrote about how he was able to do this, including driving 50 miles to make drops. He was caught when an employee noticed he was handling large numbers of small envelopes while wearing latex gloves and reported it. He probably would have gotten away with it if he'd worn winter gloves over the latex. That'd be a great mystery novel clue. Why are these letters only being sent in the winter? so the perpetrator can use a mailbox wearing gloves without arousing suspicion. Knightsbridge robbery. The boss of the gang cut himself while breaking into the lockboxes and in the dark found out too late. There was blood all around the place, too much to clean up. He nevertheless managed to get away with $60 million and hide somewhere in South America, but at some point decided to go back to England to retrieve his Ferrari, being arrested in the process. Surely if you took $60 million and inexplicably wanted your specific Ferrari, you just hire someone to get it. The guy who created the Silk Road gave himself away by initially introducing the Silk Road to the world from an email address that would ultimately lead investigators right to him. Watch the documentary on this, it was absolutely fascinating. The United California bank robbery of 1972. The 6 perpetrators had rented a vacation home to use as a base and cleaned it top to bottom before leaving. Except they forgot to start the dishwasher before they left, and police were able to match all of their fingerprints off the dirty dishes. Men fucking up the dishes, SMH. I work in downtown Chicago. Last year, one guy robbed the Fifth Third Bank across the street. He escaped into the Ogilvy Transportation Center and disappeared into the night despite it being so crowded and busy. Got away with the money and everything. Until 3 weeks later, when a woman recognized him as having flirted with her right before he robbed the bank and had given her his phone number. She handed that over to the authorities and he was successfully caught. Bro, he was so close to getting away with it. Foiled by his own boner. Ariel Castro gained international attention for abducting, brutalizing and keeping 3 girls in his house for over 11 years. This was before he forgot the door unlocked one time when he left the house, and Amanda Berry was finally able to run out and use a stranger's phone to dial 911. That's quite a bad enough story, and I could have easily stopped there and still had one of the most disturbing posts on this submission. But the investigation also found that his next door neighbor had abducted a girl back in the early 90s, and he still had her remains buried in his basement. He might have never been caught, and that girl would have still been a missing person cold case, if Amanda Berry was never able to make that phone call. Wait, what? I never heard about the neighbor. Harold Shipman, seemingly a normal GP, turns out to be a prolific serial killer with maybe up to 250 victims over his career. Only discovered when a hospital worker was concerned about the number of cremation forms they had to process for his elderly patients, so very close to going undetected. Damn, he had to be killing a lot of people for the amount of dying elderly people to be suspicious. The Indiana fertility specialist who was using his own sperm to fertilize the eggs of his patients in the 1980s. He was part of the Quiverful cult and fathered a confirmed 94 children in his home area, but it's estimated there could be over 200 half-siblings. He was found out decades later when one of his patients' children took a DNA test and found 7 half-siblings matches. He absolutely would have gotten away with it if it weren't for those meddling kids. https://time.com/6176310/our-father-true-story-netflix/ I just watched this like a week ago and was horrified. Probably the DC snipers. They couldn't convince the police to talk to them because they were swamped with fake callers, so the snipers told them to look into a murder in another state. This started the chain of events to them being found out, but before that the police had nothing. Nothing. The public was absolutely terrified and the police had no clue who was responsible. The You're Wrong About podcast did a fantastic job telling this story. The DC sniper's story is one of those things that has kind of been forgotten about, but it was absolutely insane when it happened. I remember them telling people to constantly move their head around while pumping gas. Christian Bale killed a man and got away with it, only to write a fictional book going into detail of what he did, and sales of said book went up after he was convicted. Edit. Welp, I didn't expect this to be my most upvoted comment, but I'll allow it. There was an Austrian murderer, Jack Unterweger, who had strangled an 18-year-old woman with her bra. He started writing in prison and getting national notice, which led to people campaigning for his release, claiming that he was reformed. He did get released and became a journalist, appearing on TV and commenting on crimes. He covered some murders where women were strangled with their bras. Guess who killed them? He was convicted and immediately killed himself in prison. While working as a journalist, he had gone to LA for a story and went on an LAPD ride-along. It was later established that, during his time there, 3 LA sex workers were strangled with their bras. Willie Sutton was one of the greatest bank robbers and never hurt anyone. He was caught when his car broke down and he bought a sandwich and was recognized. The guy who recognized him went on the news and talked about it. Someone killed him for it and they never solved the case. John List. He just wouldn't stop wearing those damned glasses that he technically didn't even need, because he openly assumed he looked more important by wearing glasses, which would wind up being his undoing after just about 2 decades of successfully evading the authorities. North Hollywood robbers would have gotten in and out if they hadn't walked in as a cop car was passing. They were well outfitted and already had a few robberies under their belt. Watching that footage, it's insane that the only fatalities were the perpetrators. Granted, there were long-term and traumatic injuries, but given the hundreds of rounds fired, there could have been dozens of fatalities. The real answer is that there are many perfect crimes, in the sense that no one is ever arrested for having committed them. In 1969, Ted Conrad walked out of a bank in Cleveland with $215,000 in cash, equivalent to $1,700,000 in 2021, and was never caught. He lived his life as a free person in Boston before confessing to his family just before he died. https://www.nbcnews.com/news/who-pulled-1-cleveland-s-biggest-bank-heist-identified-in-1283851. Interesting. Nothing in that article says he told his family. Guess that would be embarrassing for law enforcement. Al Capone was doing all the crimes, and it's the tax evasion that got him. I worked as a tax preparer for a bit. Had multiple drug dealers and prostitutes come in who didn't want to be Caponed. Nuke Bizzle stole $700,000 in fraudulent ed claims, then released a song about it when someone saw the music video and tipped off the covered fraud HTML, in which he showed the actual documents. Here, https://yahoo.be/k0ck7ht sug8 closed bracket is the mirror of the video. Tracy Frame. She murdered her live-in boyfriend by shooting him in his sleep, wrapping his body up in an electric blanket and tarp, and drove a bit out of the way to dump his body in a drain pipe. Couldn't fit him, so she left him on the side of the road, dumped gasoline over him, and set him on fire. He had to be identified with dental records. Police suspected her, but they had no evidence until employees from a janitorial supply company told police and said a woman matching her description came in asking how to get bloodstains out of carpet. They told her to try a specific kind of acid. So, she goes to a store to buy the acid and the cameras see a woman purchasing on the day of the murder, but the quality of the footage was shitty, so it could be Tracy or it could be any random white woman with brown hair in the suburbs. The only way they were able to confirm it was Tracy was because she had used her loyalty rewards card on the purchase of the acid to save like 13 cents. I read about a criminal who was wanted on a US warrant, but his country wouldn't extradite to the US. He was eventually caught when an international flight routed through the JFK airport. The police met the plane at the gate and dragged him off. He had taken advantage of a super saver fare. Loeb and Leopold, two high IQ teenagers in Chicago in the 1920s, committed a murder just because they thought they were too clever to be caught. One of them lost a lens from his glasses where they dropped the body. Very rare RX that led the police right to them. Also didn't help that the two wouldn't stop talking about how they got away with the killing. Roger Golubski's mafia was undone by JZ in the Washington Post. They still getting away with everything though.